Well, hi there. It's been a while, hasn't it? I have been preoccupied with life and just existing and trying to do life things, so much so that I haven't been able to make any videos for a while. But I'm back. I wanna make videos again, and I wanna make more, obviously. So, in an attempt to get back into the swing of creating videos for YouTube, I figured I would start with something that's relatively easy to make, and that's basically just going to be me ranting about some things about the relatively recent addition to the game, the quest While Guthix Sleeps, just ranting about some aspects of it that I don't think are good, or that I think were done wrong, or could have been implemented better, stuff like that. And while I'm doing so, I am just going to be bonking these elite Black Knights because I like their drop table, and I think it's kind of interesting. You can tell by the bones here that this is not the first take of me doing this. Haha, don't worry about it. Anyway, While Guthix Sleeps is a quest that was added into old school RuneScape a few weeks ago at this point, I think. Something like that. It is more or less a direct beat-for-beat port of the original quest when it was released in RuneScape itself, whatever year it was. Was it 2009? I feel like I read somewhere it was 2009. I'm not exactly certain on that. The quest in old school RuneScape, I don't want to say it's bad, but you can tell from the title of the video that I do think it has problems, flaws that could arguably make it bad. And like, I feel as though, yes, these are going to be to some degree just personal complaints or issues that I have with it, but at the same time, I feel like there's a little bit of a danger that this quest kind of represents, and that danger would be the old school RuneScape devs in the future more and more often taking the route of porting content from a completely different game into old school RuneScape and doing it poorly. There are examples of them porting content from RuneScape into old school pretty well. I only know of a few of them offhand, like I think the Corporeal Beast was one, Next, Soul Wars, stuff like that. This quest is an example of what they shouldn't be doing. So, I've got 3 major points throughout this video, and I'll be sure to have some timestamps down in the video description so you can take a look at that, and if you feel like skipping ahead to the next point, do your thing. I'm not your boss. You really would pull out your protection prayer right then. Man, these guys, I love the drop table of the Elite Black Knight, but their mechanics are just so weird. Not bad, just weird. Anywho, meandering ramble aside, let me just start. The first point I want to talk about is about Turael, Duradel, and Gommel. Now, fair warning here, at this point this is just going to be pure spoilers for the quest, so if you haven't already done it and you don't know what it entails, go do the quest and then come back and continue watching. During the quest While Guthix Sleeps, Turael and Duradel, the 2 Slayer Masters, and Gommel, the guard, I guess, at the front of the Warriors Guild, are all very unceremoniously vaporized by Lucien. I'm sure that this was probably a very major, plot or a very major story beat in the original version of the game, or the quest when it first released. I'm sure it was. But in old school RuneScape, all it does when that happens is it just makes the player feel weird. Now, let me explain a little bit. Turael, Duradel, and Gommel are 3 of the... I think they actually are 3 of the most integrated NPCs into old school RuneScape culture. Like the player-based culture. What I mean by that is they've been around in old school RuneScape for as long as the game, as long as this game has been released, I think. Pretty sure. So 2013, 11 years, 12 years, some long time like that. In that time, the players have come to know these 3 specific NPCs not as who they are as written characters, not at all. Like, this drop will never not be hilarious to me. Not as the characters that are written into the story or the world, but they'll know them as the mechanics that they represent. Turael has always been known in old school RuneScape as the lowest level Slayer Master. If you need Slayer points, there's a method that people have come to use that has been coined Turael boosting, or Slayer point boosting. Turael is so important to this game's sort of player-generated mythos that there is an entire technique named after him, Turael boosting. Nobody really cared much about Turael the character, from like a narrative perspective or a world-building perspective. Nobody cared. But what they knew was that he and the way that he functions within the Slayer skill are integral to the most popular skill in the game and how it works, right? So when you just kind of port content, old content from a different game, where he is randomly and unceremoniously dumped for no good reason, and replace him with an NPC who almost literally, if not literally, did not have a presence in the game's world before that. It's like, it's just, God, it is so hard. It's honestly hard to explain these things, but I kind of hope that I'm sort of getting the point across here. The NPC himself was very important. He was important to the Slayer skill's identity, and the same goes for Duradel, by the way. It is, I'll be honest, genuinely very difficult to try and explain these thoughts, because they're really meta. They really have to do with how the players interact with the video game. Not how the players interact with the world, or the lore, or any of that stuff, but how they interact with the game itself. When you remove those elements in a cutscene that, frankly, is just bad, you're kind of spitting on that meta concept that players have come to know, that they have developed. You're just like not over. You're more or less overtly saying you don't care about that, and it feels, what's the word? Disrespectful. It's disrespectful to the way that the players have come to know the Slayer skill. Duradel is the same thing as Turael, like I said. Duradel is where in old school RuneScape you have always gone to get your Slayer cape when you hit 99 Slayer. Like, that NPC is or represents the culmination of 13.03 million Slayer experience. Hours and hours and hours and hours of training the skill. Duradel represents all of that, and he has since the game launched, or since Slayer was implemented, which I'm pretty sure was from the moment Old School RuneScape first came out. To suddenly take away that thing that players have known for so long in, once again, honestly really bad cutscene, it's just, it's rude. It's disrespectful, alright? But those two, the two Slayer Masters, aren't even that bad compared to Gommel, alright? So Gommel, the guard outside of the Warriors Guild, Gommel represents something that is extremely unique to old school RuneScape. RuneScape proper, or I guess I should just start calling it RS3. RS3 has Slayer, and it has Slayer Masters, and it has Gommel too. But what it doesn't have is old school RuneScape's combat achievements. Remember when those launched, when the combat achievements launched in this game? It was a really, really big deal for the player base. And everyone has come to know at this point that the combat achievements are not only a thing that exist, but they're a thing that are worth going for. And just like Turiel and Duradel, what represents the combat achievements, aka the player's personal achievements within the game, more than Gommel? Gommel the NPC. That is what he is. He is combat achievements. So when you just take him and delete him, where does that leave the player base who have come to know the guy for so long? It's not like the players can't just get used to there being someone different there. It's not like they can't do that. That's totally possible. But a large part, I feel like a large part of the identity of some of these things that make old school RuneScape gets stripped away. Unfairly, almost. Now, how could they have done this better based on the way the quest is written? I have no idea. I'm not a designer or a writer in that sense. Like, I don't know how they do their things. I don't know their workflow, their processes, none of that stuff. But there had to be some way to make it make sense. Maybe modify the writing and dialogue in the quest? Maybe actually introduce the NPCs that would replace them before or during the quest so that we actually cared when the character died? So that we could like, as players, we would be able to, in our minds, isolate the difference between the NPCs that were killed because of the narrative and the mechanics and the meta that they represent. That might have been better. How they would do that, once again, I'm not exactly sure, not up to me. I'm not exactly trying to offer solutions here. I am rambling a lot. I apologize. Why did I equip? You know what? That's fine. I'm kind of rambling a little bit. Sorry for that. I don't know if there's too much more I can really say about the NPCs. It just rubbed me the wrong way when it happened. And that's... Anyway, right. I could probably ramble myself in circles. So what I'm going to do instead is move on to my second point that I have. My second point is more about the narrative in the game's world, which is also another element that I think the quest While Guthix Sleeps has failed the players. You know the mahjarrat? The mahjarrat that are like kind of the driving force behind almost all of the plots in this game to some degree, right? The mahjarrat who, based on old school RuneScape's lore that I know of, can sense each other's presence and can teleport and shapeshift and are trying to seek out ultra-powerful artifacts, yada yada yada. You know those guys? You know what's missing in While Guthix Sleeps? Interaction from literally any of the other mahjarrat other than Lucian. Desert Treasure 2, which is what I'm going to use as a comparison point. Desert Treasure 2 featured a ton of the mahjarrat. A ton of them. A whole bunch. I'm not even sure how many exactly. And throughout the course of the quest, what you ultimately find is that they're all pretty much vying for control over one specific ancient ultra-powerful artifact, right? Which is, that's cool, that's good. That makes, that works. That works as a story. And the point here is that that quest, that story, is exclusive to old school RuneScape. That is the old school RuneScape lore and world, right? So then after that, Jagex releases While Guthix Sleeps, which features only one mahjarrat. There's no interaction or engagement from any of the others, which is kind of counter to their entire characterization in this game. It's counter to their entire story, it's counter to their everything. And, like, think about it. Just think about it for a moment here, okay? The mahjarrat and Desert Treasure 2 are trying so hard to control one specific artifact. And yet, only one of them goes after the Stone of Jas, which is arguably, like, the most powerful thing in this entire game's universe? Only one of them goes after it, and somehow none of the others are aware of this and try to intervene or try to engage or watch or anything like that? Like, you know what would have made this quest better from a narrative perspective? Maybe the player should have encountered, like, agents or spies or something that are working for the other mahjarrat. Now, something important to keep in mind here is that Desert Treasure 2 is not required for While Guthix Sleeps, and the reverse is true as well. So, like, yes, they are kind of isolated narratives, certainly, but they're all still taking place within this world and within this game's narrative. So the fact that there's no interaction at all between Lucian and all of the other mahjarrat throughout this quest in any way feels empty. It feels wrong. Like there's something missing that should be here. That should be old school RuneScape, right? If they had maybe let the quest cook a little bit longer and not just done like a bit of a nostalgia grab and ported the original thing over more or less directly, they probably could have addressed this from a writing perspective, but they didn't. So like, it just makes no sense. It just makes no sense. Why would none of the other mahjarrat be paying attention to this? That's wrong. That's weird. I'll interject on myself for a moment here. First, just a reminder, like I said at the beginning of the video, this is more or less a rant than it is anything else. Like, I'm not trying to make very coherent points, I'm just talking. I love this game. I really do. Like, look at how maxed I am. I want to see the game be the best that it can be. A lot of the recent content that's come out for old school RuneScape in the last few years that has been very, very good has been old school RuneScape exclusive. And I really wish Jagex would just focus more on making things for this game instead of bringing things back from the other game. I really wish they would, because their abilities, their skills as designers and developers really, really shine when they're making their own stuff, when they're not trying to ride the coattails of something that already exists. Especially when that thing that already exists is over a decade old. Like, While Guthix Sleeps is dated. It is old. It is old enough. It is old enough to get, like, a driver permit in many states in the United States. It could drive. The quest could drive a car. I don't know what I'm getting at with that. I just think it's funny to think about that way. Oh, you know what? Actually, now that I think about it, this interjection on myself is kind of the third point that I had to talk about. Yeah, I'm just looking over at my notes that I have on my other monitor. Don't mind me getting meta. Fun fact, I am still a human, and I still do human things, like talk too much. Anyway, like I said, the game really, really shines. The developers' skills as developers really, really shine when they're making their own stuff. Varlamore, Zaya, Tombs of Amasket. I mentioned Zaya, like a whole ass continent. And Varlamore, a whole ass other part of that same continent. Like, it's damn good stuff. Critically amazing. And then port content like this happens, and it's full of flaws. It's just full of flaws. Why don't they just keep making their own? Why don't you guys just keep making your own stuff and bringing your own wonderful ideas to life instead of relying on the ideas of the past? But sure, there's a factor of, like, nostalgia or things like that. Maybe, for all I know, and I don't work on this game, so I'm not sure about this, but maybe it is actually just easier to port old content, easier and faster than it is to develop new content. To the point that porting stuff just ends up being a relatively cost-effective way to maintain regular, interesting updates, right? I can totally understand that. But just because that might be the case doesn't justify doing it. It doesn't make it worth doing. If anything, it just ends up putting flawed content into the game that doesn't need to be there. Now, sure, for, like, a narrative, for the game's relatively overarching narrative with the mahjarrat, this quest did have to happen at some point. Like, the loose ends of Lucian and the Staff of Armadil had to be tied at some point, and I know that. But I still think they could have done something more old-school RuneScape and less not old-school RuneScape. This quest doesn't have an identity rooted in this game, I guess. Ugh. That was almost enough ranting to fill an inventory of this stuff. You know what was really funny? When I was actually going through the quest, the first one of these guys that I killed to get my pieces of elite black knight armor. It's a bit of a mouthful. The first one that I killed to get my first pieces of that dropped like 50, I think it was 57 onyx bolt tips during the quest, which was really hilarious to me. I love that. Arrgh. Well, there really is no good or easy way, there really is no good or easy way to end a video that's just a whole bunch of ranting like this. If you did listen to the whole thing, I'm assuming that you did so because you like listening to me talk, which, hey, thank you, I appreciate that. Or maybe you're somebody who's actually really invested in this game and its development and wants to see it be the best that it can be. I don't, like, at the end of it all, at the end of all of this, I don't hate the quest While Guthix Sleeps. I think it's fine. But I think it's only fine in a vacuum. As soon as you introduce old school RuneScape, the identity that this game has and everything that's in it, that is exclusive to it, to While Guthix Sleeps, there's just so many, there's so many bits that don't mesh. They don't mesh at all. I don't know. I feel like I feel like there needed to be a lot more effort put into making While Guthix Sleeps actually unique. I really do. My inventory is practically full. It's not like I need to actually kill these for anything, or collect the drops or anything like that, but I can if I want. And hey, this means I just have a whole bunch of free proselyte to risk in the wilderness. I'm not going to worry about that. If you are a Jagex dev who happened to watch this whole thing, or at least listen to me talk about it, thank you for hanging out, and I hope I gave you something to think about. For the future, if you're gonna port content into old school RuneScape, please try to make it more old school RuneScape and less RuneScape. I don't play this game to play a different game. I play this game to play this game. You know? Alright, that's enough rambling. It is getting really hot in my room because it's the middle of summer and my computer runs like a frickin' 12 toasters, so I'm gonna sign off here. Hopefully, I will have more videos relatively soon. We'll see what I can manage. And that is all. I'm just gonna keep smacking these guys, I guess. Thanks for hanging out. Hope you have a good day. Pardon the voice crack. Hope you have a good whatever, wherever you are. And I will see you later.